What happens when a Hollywood A-lister like Mark Wahlberg sits down for what is supposed to be a routine, carefully orchestrated morning show interview complete with polished smiles, upbeat banter, and safe promotional questions only to find himself unexpectedly cornered by a host who seems to have a personal edge beneath the professional polish? That morning inside the bright, bustling studio of Good Morning America, the atmosphere felt unusually tense, as though the air itself carried an invisible weight. What should have been a standard promotional appearance for Wahlberg's latest high-octane action thriller gradually transformed into one of those rare live television moments when the carefully maintained facade of morning show cheerfulness begins to crack. Viewers tuning in with their coffee likely expected lighthearted conversation, a few jokes about early call times, perhaps a playful anecdote from the film set, but what unfolded instead was a slow-burn exchange that left even seasoned studio staff shifting uneasily behind the cameras when Wahlberg stepped onto the set that Tuesday morning. He did so with the confidence and easy charisma that have defined his decades-long career. Dressed sharply, posture straight, and wearing that unmistakable Boston-bred grin, he waved casually to the audience before taking his seat opposite co-host Michael Strahan. The lights overhead were intense, reflecting off the sleek studio decor, while producers whispered cues through headsets and cameramen adjusted angles for the perfect two-shot. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Another celebrity guest making the promotional rounds. Another segment designed to entertain millions of viewers across the country. Strahan opened the segment with his trademark warmth, his voice rich and energetic as he welcomed audiences back from commercial break, and introduced Wahlberg with practiced enthusiasm. The applause sign flashed, the studio audience complied. It was morning television at its most familiar, yet beneath the polished exterior, something felt off almost immediately. Wahlberg sensed it first, not through any overt hostility, but through subtle signals: the slight stiffness in Strahan's posture, the fraction too long pause before his first question, the faint tightness around his smile. To casual viewers at home, these nuances might have been invisible, lost amid the brightness of the set and the rapid pace of live broadcasting. But to someone accustomed to interviews, someone who has navigated everything from red carpets to late-night talk shows for years, the difference between genuine warmth and restrained tension is unmistakable. Wahlberg leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, maintaining composure while quietly assessing the energy across from him. The conversation began predictably enough, with references to the new film and its demanding action sequences. However, the tone shifted when Strahan, glancing down at his notes with what seemed like deliberate casualness, remarked, "Another action film where you play the tough guy from Boston. Seems like you've been playing the same character for, 20 years?" The comment hung in the air longer than expected. It wasn't phrased as a compliment to consistency or longevity. It felt more like a challenge disguised as humor. The studio audience offered a few uncertain laughs, unsure whether they were witnessing playful teasing or the beginning of something sharper. Wahlberg's expression changed almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, the easy smile faded from his face. Yet he did not snap back defensively. Instead, he inhaled slowly, choosing restraint over reaction. Years in Hollywood had taught him the art of measured responses, of maintaining dignity even when confronted with veiled criticism. He adjusted his jacket, leaned slightly forward, and prepared to answer not just the surface question about his filmography, but the underlying suggestion that his career lacked range or evolution. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged quick glances. Live television is unpredictable. A single off-script comment can alter the tone of an entire segment. The teleprompter continued to scroll, but the rhythm of the conversation had changed. Strahan's eyes remained fixed on Wahlberg, waiting, perhaps testing to see how far he would push back. The moment became less about promoting a movie and more about two accomplished public figures navigating the delicate balance between professionalism and personal pride for viewers at home. What began as a simple celebrity appearance now carried the unmistakable tension of an unscripted confrontation. The brightness of the set contrasted sharply with the subtle chill in the exchange. It was a reminder that even within the carefully controlled environment of a morning show, authenticity sometimes slips through the cracks. Beneath the lights, the makeup, and the rehearsed introductions, real emotions can surface unexpected, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. Well, I think each character brings something different. Mark Wahlberg began carefully, turning slightly toward Michael Strahan as he chose his words with deliberate calm. This role especially required physical preparation and emotional depth I hadn't really explored before. His tone was steady, professional, the kind of measured response that comes from years of navigating interviews, where every word can be clipped, replayed, and dissected online within minutes. Emotional depth, Strahan repeated, a faint chuckle escaping him soft enough that the studio audience likely missed it, but not soft enough to escape Wahlberg's attention. There was something in that repetition, something almost dismissive, as if the phrase itself were an exaggeration. Strahan tilted his head slightly, the practiced morning show smile still resting on his face. That's interesting, he continued, his voice light but edged with something sharper beneath the surface. Coming from someone whose career has largely been built on playing versions of the same angry guy. The remark lingered. A few members of the crew exchanged quick glances behind the cameras. This was not how the segment had been outlined during the pre-show meeting. The rundown had been simple: introduce the film, show a short clip, discuss the physical demands of the role, maybe pivot to family life or charitable work. Keep it upbeat, keep it moving. Morning television thrives on warmth and accessibility. Yet Strahan's line of questioning felt pointed, almost confrontational, as though he were deliberately steering the conversation into territory that was less about promotion and more about provocation. I'm not sure what you're getting at, Wahlberg replied, and this time the subtle cadence of his Boston accent became more pronounced, a sign that his composure was being tested. He shifted slightly in his chair, leaning forward instead of back. I've done comedies, dramas, action films. I've worked with incredible directors across different genres. My work speaks for itself. Does it? Strahan responded, leaning forward as well, maintaining that bright television grin even as his words grew increasingly pointed. Let's be honest, when people see Mark Wahlberg, they know exactly what they're getting. The same scowl, the same tough guy persona, the same limited range. The camera caught the precise instant Wahlberg's expression changed. Confusion flickered first, perhaps disbelief that the interview had taken this turn, then irritation settled across his features. His hands, once relaxed on the armrests, tightened visibly around the edges of the chair. The energy in the studio shifted palpably. Even the audience sensed that this was no longer playful teasing. You know what? Michael Wahlberg said, his voice controlled but unmistakably edged with frustration. I came here to talk about my film and connect with the audience. If this was supposed to be a roast, you should have told me beforehand. His words weren't shouted, but they carried weight. Years of experience had taught him not to lose his temper on live television. Yet the firmness in his tone signaled that he would not simply laugh off what he perceived as an attack. I'm just asking what viewers want to know, Strahan replied, evenly, glancing down at his notes as if to suggest journalistic duty rather than personal critique. Speaking of which, let's discuss your past. He paused, letting the words hang for effect. You've talked openly about your troubled youth, your legal issues, your time in jail. Do you ever worry that your criminal past has limited the roles you're offered? The question struck with the force of a sudden blow. Wahlberg had never hidden his early life mistakes as a teenager. He had been involved in violent incidents and had served time in juvenile detention facts. He had addressed publicly many times as part of his narrative of growth and redemption. But the framing of Strahan's question felt less like reflection and more like accusation, as though the purpose was not to explore transformation, but to reopen old wounds for dramatic effect. That's part of my story I've never hidden, Wahlberg replied, his jaw tightening as he spoke. His voice carried controlled anger now, each word carefully measured. I've been honest because I want young people to learn from my mistakes. I've spent decades trying to make things right, his tone suggested skepticism. But do you think a convicted felon should be considered a role model? You assaulted innocent people. That's not exactly the background most people associate with family entertainment. The studio fell into a heavy silence. The usual hum of morning show chatter vanished, replaced only by the faint mechanical sounds of cameras adjusting and the soft rustle of cue cards. Even the operators behind the lenses seemed uneasy, their expressions tense. Live television thrives on spontaneity, but this felt different, less like candid conversation and more like confrontation. I was a kid, Wahlberg said through clenched teeth, struggling to maintain composure. A kid who made terrible mistakes. I've taken responsibility. I've faced consequences. I've tried to make amends wherever possible. I've worked hard to build a life that reflects growth, not who I was at 16. His eyes locked onto Strahan's. What exactly are you trying to do here? I'm trying to understand. Strahan replied, adopting a tone of measured innocence. How someone with your background became so admired. Viewers deserve to know who they're supporting. The exchange had shifted far beyond the bounds of routine promotion. What began as a discussion about a film had become a public examination of character and redemption. Beneath the bright studio lights of Good Morning America, the glossy veneer of morning television peeled back to reveal something far more uncomfortable. A clash between a man defending his present identity and a host determined to revisit his past. I've made amends where I could. I've dedicated my life to being better. What exactly are you trying to do here? Mark Wahlberg demanded, his voice no longer calm but tightly wound, as if every syllable required restraint. The studio lights above seemed hotter now, the glare more intense, reflecting off the polished floor of the Good Morning America set. What had started as a promotional segment had transformed into something far more volatile, something neither rehearsed nor remotely comfortable. Across from him, Michael Strahan maintained a composed expression, though there was a flicker in his eyes that suggested calculation rather than curiosity. I'm trying to understand how someone with your background became so admired, he said, his tone smooth, almost deceptively mild. Viewers deserve to know who they support. The phrasing landed like a quiet accusation. It implied that admiration required justification, that redemption required ongoing proof. Wahlberg's jaw flexed as he processed the insinuation. You're being completely unprofessional. He shot back, the edge in his voice sharpening. This is supposed to be about my film, not about tearing me down on live television. Strahan gave a small shrug, as though the criticism didn't faze him. I think character is exactly what we should be talking about, he replied coolly. After all, you're asking people to spend their hard-earned money to watch you on screen. Don't they deserve to know what kind of person you really are? What kind of person I really am? Wahlberg echoed, his voice rising despite his effort to stay composed. The question felt less like inquiry and more like indictment. You want to know what kind of person I am? I'm someone who admits his mistakes. I'm someone who works hard every single day. I'm someone who tries to be a good father, a good husband, and a better man than I was when I was a teenager. That's who I am. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What about you, Michael? What kind of person ambushes a guest on live television? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Production assistants just off camera began making subtle gestures, small circular motions, with their fingers signaling it was time to pivot, to move to the next segment, to salvage what remained of the interview. But Strahan didn't glance their way. He remained locked onto Wahlberg, posture steady, as if this confrontation was no accident, but the culmination of something simmering beneath the surface. I'm just doing my job, Strahan replied, his voice calm but firm. Asking tough questions is what journalists do. Journalists. Wahlberg let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound sharp and bitter. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels more like a hit job than journalism. At that, something shifted visibly in Strahan's demeanor. The easygoing morning show persona, the broad smile, the relaxed shoulders began to fade. His face hardened, jaw tightening as he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. The gesture was defensive, but it also carried a hint of confrontation. as though he were bracing for a fight rather than moderating a conversation. A hit job? Strahan repeated, his tone now tinged with mockery. Mark, you're being very defensive for someone who claims he has nothing to hide. I'm asking questions any responsible journalist would ask. Cut the act, Michael. Wahlberg snapped, patience evaporating, his Boston accent thickened noticeably. The vowels sharper, the rhythm more forceful. You know exactly what you're doing. This isn't about responsibility. This isn't about viewers. You're trying to make a name for yourself at my expense. Make a name for myself. Strahan's laugh this time was colder, deliberate. He kept his gaze fixed squarely on Wahlberg, unblinking. Mark, I've been in television longer than you've been making movies worth watching. I don't need you for anything. The insult was direct, unmistakable. It cut through the air with brutal clarity. Wahlberg's face flushed red, anger now fully visible. His fingers gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that the leather creaked audibly. Beneath his hands, the studio audience sat frozen, unsure whether to react or remain silent. You want to talk about making names? Wahlberg shot back. Let's talk about how you went from sitting on the bench in football to riding the coattails of stronger personalities on this show. There was an audible intake of breath from someone off camera. The remark had crossed into deeply personal territory. Strahan's eyes widened slightly, disbelief flashing across his face before irritation took its place. Sitting on the bench? Strahan's voice rose for the first time, the controlled cadence slipping. I was a Super Bowl champion. His words carried pride, almost defiance. Something you'll never understand. The transformation was complete. The friendly host and the promotional guest had vanished, replaced by two men locked in a battle of ego and pride under the unforgiving glare of live television lights. What was meant to be a simple discussion about cinema had devolved into a clash over identity, credibility, and respect. Every word now felt heavier than the last, each sentence less about answering a question and more about defending legacy. Heard me, Wahlberg replied, anger fully unleashed now, his face flushed and eyes blazing. You want to attack my character? You want to question how I built my career? Then let's talk about how you really got here. The temperature in the room seemed to spike. Crew members shifted uncomfortably. A stage manager whispered urgently into a headset, likely begging for a commercial break. But the confrontation continued, raw and unfiltered. You racist piece of garbage, Strahan snarled, dropping all remnants of professional composure. His voice carried across the studio floor, echoing against the bright set walls. The accusation hung heavy in the air, unmistakable and damning. Wahlberg stepped forward abruptly, rising from his chair so quickly it scraped loudly against the polished floor. He stood tall, his presence casting an imposing shadow across the table separating them. What I really am, he shot back. I'm someone who worked for everything I have. Someone who took responsibility for his mistakes instead of playing the victim. Strahan rose to his feet as well, refusing to remain seated or intimidated. The two men now stood face to face across the narrow desk, their body language rigid, confrontational. The only barrier preventing the situation from turning physical was the furniture between them, and perhaps the faint awareness that they were still on live television. You committed hate crimes, Mark, Strahan said, his voice ringing with anger and disbelief. Real hate crimes, and you think starring in movies erases that? You think it gives you the right to talk down to me? I was 16 years old. Wahlberg shouted back, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. And I've spent 30 years trying to make up for it, 30 years working, giving back, owning up to what I did. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he struggled to control himself. What's your excuse for being a bully right now? What's your excuse for ambushing a guest on live television in the audience? Several people sat stunned, hands covering their mouths. Others stared wide-eyed, unsure whether they were witnessing a meltdown or a career-ending implosion. The bright, cheerful set design for cooking segments and celebrity interviews now felt like an arena for something far uglier. Strahan's fists clenched at his sides. My excuse, he began, his voice sharp and unyielding. The last fragments Of his on-air persona stripped away, the professional host had disappeared entirely, replaced by a man who felt personally attacked and unwilling to retreat. Round them, producers were in full crisis mode. A red light blinked on one of the cameras, signaling the live broadcast continued uninterrupted. Somewhere in the control room, a director likely shouted for a hard cut to commercial. But the seconds stretched unbearably long. The confrontation had ceased to be about a film, about ratings, or even about past mistakes. It had become something far more personal, a clash over identity, accountability, respect, and the deep wounds that words can reopen. Under the relentless glare of studio lights, two public figures stood locked in a moment that would not be easily forgotten. The confrontation inside the brightly lit studio of Good Morning America had already escalated beyond anything viewers expected from a morning broadcast. What had started as a promotional interview had deteriorated into a deeply personal and explosive clash between Mark Wahlberg and Michael Strahan. And now there was no disguising the hostility in the air. "And who am I really, Michael?" Wahlberg demanded, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that was equal parts challenge and warning. The movement was theatrical, but not calculated. His emotions were plainly visible now. "Go ahead. Tell everyone watching." Strahan stepped closer to the desk separating them, his voice lowered, losing its broadcast brightness and becoming something darker, more dangerous. The softness somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You're a violent criminal who got lucky in Hollywood," he said deliberately. "You're someone who hurt innocent people because of their race. And now you expect the world to treat you like a hero because you can memorize lines and look tough on camera. You know exactly what you are." The accusation echoed across the silent studio. Wahlberg took a step forward too, closing what little distance remained between them. His voice dropped to match Strahan's intensity, controlled but seething. "And you're a failed athlete who couldn't keep up when real competition showed up," he shot back. "Now you sit behind a desk throwing stones at people who've actually built something." Failed athlete. Strahan's composure cracked completely. His voice rose, thick with fury. "I played 14 seasons in the NFL. I'm in the Hall of Fame. I have a Super Bowl ring." The pride in his accomplishments was unmistakable, deeply personal. "What have you done that's real? What have you accomplished that wasn't handed to you by Hollywood executives? Real?" Wahlberg let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You want to talk about real? I've built businesses from the ground up. I've created jobs for real families. I've invested in communities. I've taken risks. I've put my name and money on the line." His chest heaved as he spoke. "I contribute instead of sitting in a comfortable chair attacking guests who show up in good faith." "Good faith?" Strahan scoffed. "You came here to promote another mindless action movie where you play the same character you've played for years. Don't pretend you're performing some public service. At least I create something." Wahlberg snapped. "At least I put myself out there." "What do you create, Michael? What do you build? You tear people down on television and call it journalism." "I expose frauds." Strahan replied coldly. "I ask the questions that need to be asked. I hold people accountable, especially those who think their fame makes them untouchable." "Untouchable?" Wahlberg's voice rose again, his face reddening under the studio lights. "I've been more open about my past than almost anyone in Hollywood. I admitted every mistake. I apologized. I've tried to make amends. I've spent decades trying to be better than the kid I was. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to admit you don't deserve the platform you have," Strahan said bluntly, his words slicing through the tension. "I want you to admit that someone with your past shouldn't be treated as a role model. I want you to stop pretending that money and fame erased the harm you caused." The accusation hung heavily in the air. Even the audience seemed to stop breathing. Wahlberg's fists tightened at his sides. For a fleeting moment, it genuinely appeared as though the confrontation might turn physical. Security personnel stationed at the edges of the set subtly shifted, their weight alert and ready. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every flicker of emotion, anger, resentment, pride, and something deeper beneath it all. "You're out of line," Wahlberg said through clenched teeth. You're way out of line, and you know it. Am I, Strahan challenged, stepping forward again? Or am I just saying what other people are thinking but are too polite to say out loud? You're a criminal, Mark, a violent criminal who hurt people because of their skin color. That's not just the past, that's part of who you are. That's enough, Wahlberg exploded, his voice booming across the studio. Crew members flinched instinctively. The polished morning show atmosphere had shattered entirely, replaced by raw, unfiltered confrontation. You want to keep pushing me? Wahlberg continued, breathing heavily. You want to keep attacking me personally? Fine. Let's talk about you. Strahan's eyes narrowed, but he did not retreat. Go ahead, he said evenly, though tension radiated from his stance. Let's hear what the convicted felon has to say. A stunned murmur rippled faintly through the audience before fading again into silence. You really want that? Wahlberg asked, his voice lowering once more, no longer shouting, but simmering with intensity. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was a warning dot in that moment. The confrontation had transcended career criticism or journalistic debate. It had become a battle over identity, redemption, legacy, and respect to powerful public figures locked in a struggle not just over words, but over how they would be defined in front of millions watching at home.